And welcome back to Comment Frontline, everybody. I am Brant Fowler, aka the Gonzo Goose, back with you for another review. This one is a special one to me because it's the WWE WrestleMania 2017 special from Boom Studios. WrestleMania, as my fellow wrestling fans know, is this coming Sunday, and the whole WrestleMania weekend starts. Kicks off Friday. Um, yeah, I think Friday with Takeover, and then Saturday with the Hall of Fame, or vice versa, and then of course the big event WrestleMania. So Boom Studios, who have the WWE license and have been doing the WWE comic, put out this special, and it is kind of an anthology series, and it's different WrestleMania stories in a way. So it's pretty cool. I recommend it for wrestling fans. It's got, let's see, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different stories in it. It's like 42 pages, 44 pages long, and they are fantastic stories. I will say that up front before I even get into it. I think this was a really well done book, but I'm going to break it down by each story and let you know what I thought. So, first off, we have Ladder Match, written by Box Brown, illustrated by Jorge Corona, and this is the it's a kind of a retelling of the famous ladder match between Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon at WrestleMania 10, and it's done in such a way that it's almost kind of poking fun at it a little bit. It's like Razor worrying about walking under the ladder, but he thinks he's got good luck because he's got toothpicks behind his ear, and Shawn Michaels saying, "I don't know if this is what Bret Hart intended, but I'm gonna hit him with this ladder here," and they're arguing back and forth, and there's a little joke about Razor telling Diesel, "We'll never be friends again, ever," and of course we know they become the outsiders in the NWO later on. So it's a fun story. The art is kind of a little bit overly done. It's a little bit cartoony, and not all the stories are like this. Most of them are more realistic, but this was a fun kind of poking fun back to that era, which was kind of the transitional era between the more cartoony style that WWE used to be back in the early 80s to what it became in the 90s. So it was a fun story. I appreciate it. At first I was like, I hope the whole book's not like this, but I can appreciate the humor here. And it's like, we know in that match there was a point where Razor grabbed Shawn Michaels' tights and he kind of mooned the whole crowd, and as he's going up the ladder in this comic, Shawn Michaels is like, I wonder if I wore underpants today, and then he's like, guess not. And it's funny. It's like I said, it pokes fun at the whole thing. So I thought that was a really fun story. Following that, we have The Long Con, written by Dennis Hopeless with art by Dan Mora, and this was a really good story about Triple H and his kind of rise to power. It was back in the time where he had his knee injury, and he was fighting Chris Jericho for the world title, and Stephanie had sided with Jericho, and they kind of played into that, and it almost mirrored what they're doing with Seth Rollins now, where Mr. McMahon was like teasing Triple H and telling him he's never going to be as big as he could if he had just lined up with the Authority. He could have made something of himself, and all the while he's kind of reminiscing, saying he had Stephanie, the boss's daughter. He went against the grain, and he had DX behind him, and all this stuff. And you see him laid up in bed and trying to get back and trying to train and trying to prove Vince McMahon wrong. And it's this whole thing, and then he comes up with this plan, which is called the Long Con. We're gonna have to play a role, but it's going to end up with us in charge. And they're like, let's do it. And so that's kind of the story, and it's kind of where Seth Rollins could have gone if he stayed in line with the Authority, kind of thing. So it was an interesting contrast, showing how similar these two are in their careers, especially with the knee injuries and coming back and fighting against that regime, and so on and so forth. It was interesting. So then we have the New Day's Optimistic Odyssey Part 3, which this has been an ongoing short story in the WWE comic. And this one is written by Ross Thibodeau and illustrated by Rob Guillory. And they're time traveling with their cardboard box. It's very Bill and Ted kind-ish, and it's very cartoony, and it shows them going back through the time stream, different eras of wrestling, through the Attitude Era, the Monday Night Wars, and so on and so forth, fixing things and saying, okay, we got rid of all the booty. And then it ends up with them facing kind of Mortal Kombat-ish unicorn characters to wrap it up, and they have to fight, and it's a goofy story. If you like the New Day, and they'd be a perfect cartoon. Then you have You're Good But, and it's a Daniel Bryan story. It's written by Aubrey Sitterson, who did the Street Fighter G.I. Joe comic, and he's a wrestling fan. He does a wrestling podcast, and illustrated by Kendall Good. And this was a Kendall Good. I'm not familiar with his work prior to this, but it's a beautifully illustrated story. Aubrey did a really good job writing this, and it was kind of chronicling Daniel Bryan's rise from the indies to the present, or not to the present, but to that WrestleMania moment where he won the world title by beating Triple H and Batista in the same match. And it was him narrating and saying, it's always been people telling me, you're good, but you're not quite good enough, and you're never going to make it. And it's like, it shows him in the indies, you're not quite what they're looking for. Then he bulks up, you're still not exactly what they want. And then he gets up to NXT, and you don't have any charisma. And it shows the nexus, and then him joining Team WWE, and then fighting against this and this and that, and all the way to the top when Triple H is telling him you're a B player. And it was a good and powerful story of his rise and his never giving up attitude, and never stopping, and always proving everybody wrong, no matter what his stature was, no matter how little charisma people said he had. And you look at him now, and he's like one of the most popular wrestlers there is, even though he can no longer wrestle because of his neck injury. It was a powerful story. I really appreciated that one. That was probably the best story in this book. That one, and the long con, the Triple H one. But this one, this last one to close it out, was pretty good too. It's the Kevin Owens comic, and it's written by Andy Bellinger and Andrew Stott. And actually, that's the story was by them, and then Andrew Stott actually scripted it, and then Andy Bellinger illustrated it. So it was a collaboration between those two, and it was kind of the rise of the friendship and the dissolution of the friendship between Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. And it was interesting. It took them all the way back to when they were kids playing with wrestlers in the ring while they're watching WrestleMania or whatever, and how Kevin Owens was always one-upping Sami and kind of bullying him a little bit, but still acting like he's his friend and stuff. And Sami kind of over the years just kind of holding it in until they go all the way up to that NXT moment where Kevin Owens turned on Sami Zayn, and then they're fighting for the Intercontinental Championship at WrestleMania. And it takes them to the last page where they're embroiled in fists flying against each other, and it says, we're going to fight forever. And that's kind of the story they've told with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. It always comes back to them. Just this past Monday on Monday Night Raw, they fought again in a no disqualification match, and if Sami Zayn lost, he was going to get fired. So it always goes back to them, and it's just kind of, they built it up, they played it up as this epic feud, this epic story between the two of them. Overall, I thought this was a fantastic collection of stories that are right in the season of WrestleMania for a wrestling fan, for a fan of the Boom Studios WWE comic. This is fantastic. You will love this. You get two very serious actually three very serious and very heartfelt stories of rises to power and this and that, and then you get two more fun stories to kind of balance it out in between there. I love this book. I thought it was almost perfect. I would give this one like a 4 3/4 star. I absolutely love this. As a wrestling fan, as a comic fan, I thought this collection of stories came together really nicely. They chose fantastic writers and artists to pair up for these different stories. And again, as a wrestling fan, I think you've got to pick this up, especially it's WrestleMania week. You definitely want to kind of indulge in everything WrestleMania you can get your hands on, and this is definitely worth the buy. So 4 3/4 stars for WWE WrestleMania 2017 Special, and that's going to do it for this review. Check out all the other reviews and all the other content here on Comic Frontline. Check out our live show every Tuesday night around 9:30 10 p.m. Eastern time, as we do our top 5 and go through the week in comic news and so on and so forth. You can find me on lastnumberpress.com, zone4podcast.com, What the Card, and of course my YouTube channel, Brant Fowler, where I do weekly series called Monday Musings, random thoughts in under 4 minutes, and I do some other vlog videos and stuff like that too. And don't forget, we have a pre-order for Celestial Falcon on Etsy.com/LastInThePress. And going back to wrestling and WrestleMania, Chris and I, and possibly Justin Allen, maybe some other guests, are going to do some kind of live WrestleMania commentary this Sunday right here on Comic Frontline, so you don't want to miss that if you're a wrestling fan. So until then, take care. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.